Woody ended playing for a while, and so I quit, and then I played briefly with Stan Kenton at the tail end of '53. He'd had a bus accident or something, and I joined him without rehearsing at all. I just joined him in Chicago, and they were in the middle of a tour, which lucky for me, included Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Errol Garner, Slim Gaylord, and at times Stan Getz. It was so every night I got to hear these players, and
it's pretty good company.
Well, it wasn't like company. It was like I wasn't in their company, but to hear them every night and also to ride on a bus with them and hang with them was something that's pretty lucky for anybody to get, And my friendship with Dizzy, of course, he has friendship he had with a lot of people, but he was a real warm man, and he never always went out of his way to come up and say hello, which really made me feel very important, like 30 years later.
And how old were you then when that was going on?
1953, I would be I'd be 29 years old, I guess. Well, that was a marvelous experience, and I got to appreciate the dedication that Diz had into his playing. We'd finish a gig somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and with the concert, and he'd do the whole Dizzy bit with the humor and everything, and then we'd go play in an after-hours club, say in Abilene, someplace like that. And Dizzy would be there playing.
For the love of it.
No showbiz, just playing. And if there was no piano, he'd play piano. And if there was no bartender, he'd tend bar. Believe it, I saw him do that. And if the piano was half a tone flat, he would transpose up a half tone. I mean, a few things I wish I'd learned, to play everything in all keys. So,
just for the love of it. Huh?
Yeah. And Bird, unfortunately, was pretty strung out in those days. So on most nights, he played even Bird strung out, unless he was falling down, could really play.
Mm-hmm.
But on the nights when he wasn't strung out, we learned that Diz would always be in the wings, because he knew when Bird wasn't strung out. And when he was there, and boy, I tell you, I've never heard anything like it in my life, Matter of fact, my first wife was traveling with me, and she used to say, "Why don't you play like Lee Konitz?" And I don't like wives that know a lot about music. It's not I don't like them, but my present wife doesn't know and doesn't care, although she can tell when I'm out of tune, which can be. But she says, "Why don't you play like Lee Konitz?" And I said, "Well, first of all, I was a tenor player." And then she heard the band rehearsing in Texas, of all places, at the Longhorn Ballroom in Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill Russo had written four brothers for four altos, because there were a couple of alto players touring too,
Mm-hmm.
And she heard him playing lead. It was pretty awesome, I must say, lead alto, four altos, and she said, "I've never heard anything like that in my life," and her eyes crossed almost. And boy, she never said anything more about. So anyway.
Hey, we were talking about Stan Kenton and Stan Kenton's band and how you had joined them in Chicago, was it?
Yes.
Who were his primary writers at that time? Who was coming up with the charts?
Bill Russo, and Bill Holman was just starting,
Mm-hmm.
And Lenny Niehaus had written some things. He still had a lot of Pete Rugolo stuff.
And this was in 53.
53. Yeah, I was just with them a short time, maybe 3 months. It was during this big tour,
Mm-hmm.
all-star tour.